Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we will travel to the Caribbean to the golden age of piracy. You think piracy was all cannon and chaos? Was piracy only theft or a kind of floating politics kept by votes, a quill, and a quartermaster's slate? Drift with us by lantern light, where fast sloops, clever flags, and chalkboard democracy quietly rewrote the Caribbean. If Cozy Story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. We begin when night begins. You wake to the sound of a harbour bell, soft as a spoon tapping porcelain. The bell rings once, maybe twice, a polite announcement that the tide is thinking about coming in. If you listen closely, the city is still yawning. Shutters ease open, rope knocks lazily against a mast, and a gull tries one note before deciding it's too early for opinions. It's that gentlest moment, first light, when the world feels wrapped in wool. Somewhere below, a ship's lantern keeps its small promise, a gold glow behind thick glass, swaying the way your thoughts do just before sleep. Welcome to the Caribbean, late 1600s into the early 1700s, the often called golden age of piracy. No exclamation points necessary. We'll keep the volume low and the shutters half closed. Tonight we won't begin with a cannon or a chase. We'll begin with a ledger and a coil of rope and the friendly creak of wood, because that's where most sea stories actually live. You can keep your slippers on, there's room by the rail. Think of your phone's notifications, those little nudges that tell you what the world wants from you. A message here, a reminder there, a sail that is urgently not urgent. In an older harbour, the bell did some of that work, and so did flags, and so did a man with a clipboard who believed in the future of ink. Instead of ping, you heard the push of the tide. Instead of a pop-up, you had a quartermaster, which is more user-friendly and definitely better at tying knots. Piracy, in the simplest terms, is theft at sea. But the simplicity hides a lot of weather. People on water are rarely one thing and then always that thing. Many who became pirates began as ordinary sailors or as privateers, legal raiders during wartime, clutching government papers that said in tidy phrases, "Please annoy the enemy's merchant ships and do send receipts." Then one peace treaty late in the decade, or an inconvenient lull in official permission, and a habit turns into a reputation. The line between sanctioned mischief and outlawry is thinner than canvas, and about as easy to tear in a gust. So consider pirate a role someone plays in a particular mood of history, often for a shorter time than the legend suggests, like a haircut but with more tar. There's a reason the Caribbean becomes our stage, not just because the islands look postcard perfect, though they do in the early light. Cliffs like folded linen, palms like ink strokes against a pale sky, water the colour of thoughtful glass. The reasons are the winds and the roots and the busy cupboards of empire. In this period, Spain sails silver north from the Americas. England, France and the Dutch each keep lanes rushing with sugar, tobacco, indigo, and all the other cargoes the world has decided it cannot live without. Shorter island hops mean more harbour bells and more ledger books. It also means more chances for small, fast ships, sloops and schooners, to wait where sea lanes pinch, where currents courteously slow the conversation between two ships that might never otherwise meet. Picture a map without its labels, just blue and green, islands like crumbs, currents like brush strokes, and across those strokes a few tight doorways. Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola, Mona Passage between Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, and the Narrows where the Lesser Antilles string themselves like a necklace that forgot its clasp. Merchants prefer the safest, speediest lanes. Pirates prefer the places where safest and speediest take a little nap. They know the reefs, the shelter of small coves, the winds that hug certain coasts in the afternoon. They know that a clean hull, scraped of barnacles, smelling faintly of pitch, is free speed. The way clearing your browser tab sometimes feels like clearing your mind. Before we walk the deck together, let's greet the harbour properly. The ship you're on is a modest sloop, quick on her feet, with a deck you could almost sweep in an hour if you weren't distracted by the view. The tar bucket is on the foredeck, lid pushed half back like a yawning cat. A coil of hemp rope sits neat as a pastry. A canvas awning stretches from the mainmast to the companionway, a small shade tent that makes you feel instantly cooler, even if it's mostly confidence. On the rail, a tin cup waits for water or for watered rum, whichever the day suggests. The deck smells of salt, wood warmed by yesterday's sun, and a friendly touch of onion from the galley that went to bed late. The lantern, our recurring companion, hangs in the cabin, riding its hook with sleepy dignity. It's glass-sided, horn-latticed in some ships, and inside the wick sits in oil like a small, well-mannered snake. It makes a sound when the ship moves, a miniature tide sloshing in its brass belly. You begin to understand why sailors talk about shipboard things as if they have opinions. The lantern prefers the low roll to the sharp pitch. It prefers a yes to a maybe. On calm nights, it glows like a pocket sunrise you can carry around. Now, definition. When we say piracy, we mean acts committed at sea, beyond the polite fence of shore law, where a crew without formal authority seizes a vessel or its cargo. The idea is old. The Mediterranean had its own versions long before our lantern swings over the Caribbean, and coastal raiding is as ancient as the moment someone looked at a loaded boat and thought, with admirable concision, what if ours? In this Caribbean age, though, piracy develops its own style. Many crews follow written agreements, articles, that outline shares, conduct, and the surprising amount of voting that happens when the horizon is a circle and the furniture floats. Privateering sits just beside piracy on the bench, elbows touching. A privateer carries a letter of marque, an official pass for wartime mischief. When peace arrives, some privateers tuck their letters into a drawer and keep to the old work, like a shop that never got the memo to change its hours. Others are ordinary sailors whose wages were late. This happens more often than songs admit, and who decide that if the world runs on cargo, perhaps cargo can be persuaded to come to them a little faster. We'll tread gently here. Motivations were as mixed as a harbour crowd. Poverty, adventure, resentment against harsh captains, hunger for a better share, and sometimes the simple truth that a life at sea is already full of risk, so one more step doesn't feel like a cliff. But how do such people meet? Imagine you're ashore in a lively port. Port Royal, earlier in our era, with its taverns that try very hard to keep secrets, or Nassau later, making a handshake agreement with chaos, or Tortuga, somewhere between story and stone. You can walk the waterfront at dusk and begin to collect the pieces. There's a sailmaker who wants his back pay, a cooper with very definite opinions about how barrels should be treated, a former privateer quartermaster who knows which merchants carry more insurance than crew, and a fiddler who is mostly there for the boat ride. Beyond them, a few faces who never belong to any nation's tidy categories. Free black sailors with ocean-forged expertise, indigenous pilots whose knowledge of reefs is a kind of memory map. Men and women who ran from contracts, some who ran from slavery, some who ran from boredom, which is a dangerous thing with a tide. The harbour doesn't pronounce judgments, it pronounces names of winds. The trades blow steadily from the east like a promise. The ships that matter most to a hungry crew aren't necessarily the grand Spanish galleons, too well escorted, too dramatic, but the smaller merchantmen, brigs, snows, little coasters with useful cargo you can stow quickly. The ideal raid, as many sources suggest, is calm, quick, and friendly enough that everyone can still write letters home afterward. Yes, the stories grow spiky in taverns, but at sea most people prefer the efficiency of a good bargain. A warning shot across the bow sometimes, a flag that reveals itself, a boarding that ends in a ledger's sigh. The goal is speed, and the way a clean exit feels like a blessing. Let's talk about flags in the soft glow of the lantern, because flags are feelings made fabric. A ship might run up a national flag not strictly its own. Deception was common, like wearing your cousin's coat to a distant ball. Then, at the decisive moment, down comes that colour, and up goes a more candid one. Sometimes a black flag, sometimes red, sometimes with designs that have become familiar in the centuries since. Skulls, hourglasses, bleeding hearts. There's variety though, and much of it is less theatrical than the souvenir shop suggests. The purpose is persuasion. Please surrender quickly, the flag says, and we'll keep this entirely conversational. A well-timed flag saves powder, mends nerves, avoids the kind of stories that end too abruptly. As marketing strategies go, it is bold and remarkably legible at a distance. The crew's society, how they organise themselves, belongs mostly to Part 2, but we can't resist peeking at the way a pirate crew often treats decision-making like a communal kettle. Captains have authority in battle when you need a voice that cuts through wind. Quartermasters handle the daily accounting and the little disputes before they grow into big ones. Important choices, the route, the next cruise, the fate of a prize, often go to a vote. We'll keep the romance modest. Not every crew is fair, not every article noble, and not every vote wise. But compared to the strict hierarchies on many merchant and naval ships, the balance at least offers more sailors a seat at the table, where the meat is carved and the shares are chalked. The original profit-sharing plan, you might say, minus the HR portal and with more legible handwriting. Back on deck, the sun lifts itself with the quiet pride of a loaf rising. The clerk from the harbour office walks along the pier below, holding a ledger flat with 2 fingers and a quill with the other 3. He pauses to chat with a cooper about barrels and then records something that sounds official. The ship's name, which may or may not be the ship's name, her supposed destination, a date. Dates are comforting. They anchor a day to something other than weather. Today is a day in the early 1700s, and if we believe the clerk's neat script, it will feature a light northeasterly, a modest cargo of provisions, and a curious incident near the point where the sea route narrows. If this were your calendar app, you'd set the alert to gently. We should step ashore just long enough to feel the city's breath. Streets here are like ropes tossed over a table, crooked but with purpose. Shops open their shutters like eyelids. A woman balances a basket of limes and onions on her hip, and it makes the street smell bright and honest. A ship's chandler hauls out coils of thin line and thinner, rat lines Marlene, and arranges them like pastries he baked himself. You can buy a knife to cut sailcloth, or simply to open your dinner. You can buy 3 kinds of tobacco and 6 kinds of story. On a wall, a handbill reminds sailors of the dangers of irregular employment at sea. Officials always prefer regularity, especially other people's. Down an alley, a tavern washes its flagstones with salt water and sprinkles sand to keep shoes from sliding. Even the rumour that a crew is recruiting feels like a breeze, light and tempting. And you think of the lantern again. How a small light can make movement feel like purpose. And yet, for all the warm wood and tarred rope, this is still the edge of legality. The sea allows many arrangements. The shore prefers fewer. When empires are at war, there is flexibility. Letters of marque bloom like spring. When peace arrives, cooperation becomes the fashion. Colonial governors who once winked at bold crews now clear their throats and straighten their cuffs. A pardon here, a patrol there, a gentle but insistent campaign to convince sailors that their best years are behind them. But that chapter belongs to later parts. For now, we are early in the story, when the wind seems consistently helpful, and a small vessel can feel, in the right hands, like a key to every cupboard on the map. Let's pause to meet the hands. Hands are the real instruments aboard, more reliable than any compass. There are calluses on the palms, scars that are more geography than drama, and the watch-strap tan that comes from standing where the wind requests. A hand adjusts a lanyard and then, without thinking, adjusts it again because the relationship between line and wind is a conversation that never ends. Another hand rubs a bit of pitch between finger and thumb, testing its mood. A third hand, perhaps yours, accepts the tin cup with a sip of water that tastes faintly of the barrel. A taste sailors find comforting, like remembering the cupboard where the cup sleeps. Sailors eat when the watch allows it, and this morning the galley offers ship's biscuit and something stewed low overnight. Peas, bit of pork, onion, a hint of spice that might be pepper or just a cook's optimism. The biscuit is determinedly crisp. You consider, briefly, autographs. The cook, who has signed many biscuits in his time, raises an eyebrow. Best softened, he suggests, like opinions. You dip. It helps. The spoon is wooden, worn to the shape of a small stubborn wave. When you put it down, it doesn't clatter. It finds a groove in the table like a homing bird. We should talk softly about fear. Not the movie kind. There's no need for that tonight. But the gentle, practical fear that keeps people careful. Ships disliked real battles because they risked the one thing every sailor prizes above treasure: a hull that floats and sails that draw. Powder and shot weigh down a small vessel, and ammunition cost coin that could otherwise become biscuits not suitable for autographing. So most crews preferred to persuade. They relied on speed and on a reputation for fair treatment if a prize surrendered without trouble. A merchant captain, looking at his crew of longshore poets and hope, often decided that the cargo was not worth any drama. He would heave to, offer his papers, and suggest that we all remain hydrated. The quartermaster would then do what quartermasters do: inspect, tally, and turn the messy world into a list. Do pirate crews punish? They do, sometimes, and we won't pretend sea life was all lanterns and lullabies. But many crews wrote their own rules so that discipline wasn't a surprise. They set expectations early, carved in the memory of every person who marked the paper with a careful X, because literacy is a luxury but consent is not. The rules might say, no striking a fellow crewman aboard, save in a necessary quarrel, and even then take it to shore. No gaming of the shares, lights out at a certain hour so the lanterns can sleep too. Compensation for injury appears in many such articles. A risk acknowledged, a share adjusted. All this live life doesn't make a myth by itself. It makes something steadier. Predictability. The lullaby rhythm of rules you can count. You may ask why the sea, of all places, becomes the room where such experiments in governance happen. Ships are small worlds with soft boundaries. A decision on deck today ripples through every tomorrow. If a captain hoards the best food, the rumour spreads faster than weather. If the quartermaster miscounts, the chalk squeaks in a tone everyone recognises as false. And because a crew can depose a captain by vote, as many accounts suggest, that possibility alone tempers moods. Imagine a group chat where the admin can be replaced by tapping the lantern twice. It encourages a certain courtesy, or at least a performance of courtesy, the way the sea encourages a performance of balance. We'll linger a moment on Nassau, not as a headline, but as a feeling. An island town where, for a time, the formal powers are thin and the informal ones grow thicker, like rope from many strands. A republic of pirates, people called it later, with more romance than census. Still, the idea holds. A place where crews could careen their ships, haul them onto a beach to scrape and pitch the bottoms, where traders quietly exchanged goods that didn't ask too many questions about their last owners, where a barrel of fresh water and a bundle of oranges could be yours if you knew the right knock. We can hear Nassau even now in the faintly conspiratorial way the palm fronds whisper when the onshore breeze arrives around 4. Night approaches again in our slow, generous day. The lantern is ready. It has things to say about flame care, about trimming the wick evenly so the light shines without smoke, about checking the oil level not because it is low, but because the habit is comforting. Lanterns are really just persistent bowls of fire. But the bowl is important. Without the brass, the glass, the careful shape, fire behaves like weather, and weather has no obligations. The ship's lantern is domesticated weather, a patch of reliable day in the moving night. It is the perfect emblem for this whole mischievous age. Wildness brought into a kind of order, not the state's order, but an order that keeps you fed and pointed. Everyone looks better in lantern light, even the doubts do. Before you drift, we'll answer one gentle question. Why Golden Age? Gold here is less about coins, though coins do sparkle in catalogues, and more about the shine that hindsight gives a lean, brief period when piracy in this region is unusually busy and unusually successful. The span is arguable. Historians disagree politely over where to start the clock and where to set it down. But a generous frame wraps the late 1600s through the 1710s or 1720s, tapering as empires coordinate, patrols grow consistent, and pardons play their careful music. The age is golden the way the last slant of light is golden, because it's almost gone as soon as you notice it, and because the stories it leaves are warmer than the facts. Our harbour settles into evening again, as if the day had been a rehearsal for this exact shade of blue. Nets hang to dry, each knot a memory of a hand. A boy sweeps a stoop so methodically that he forgets to stop and sweeps a little of the street for good measure. In the tavern, the floor's thin sand holds the day's footprints like a kind calendar. The clerk closes his ledger with a sound you'd call final if you didn't know there were more ships, more mornings, more bells. Near the pier, a cat climbs a barrel, tests it with a thoughtful paw and decides to keep it. And you, leaning at the rail, see your reflection melt across a small patch of water that knows exactly how to be blue. Somewhere out beyond the harbour mouth, a channel narrows where two currents argue politely. The sky strokes a cloud and calls it even. The lantern in the cabin says, in its tiny, agreeable voice, that light is best when shared. You nod, which looks a lot like sleep from a distance. We've set our terms without raising our pulse. Piracy is theft at sea, yes, but at this hour it's also an arrangement of human needs and human imaginations. A way people answered the problem of wages overdue and futures uncertain, in a geography that taught speed and reward to those who could read its winds. We've built a stage of water and wood, added a few props, tin cup, tar bucket, ledger, and cast a company drawn from every corner the Empires forgot to count carefully. In the next part, we'll climb the quarterdeck and listen as the ship's articles are read aloud, each rule like a stitch in a sail, meant not just to catch wind but to hold it usefully. For now, the lantern keeps its watch. The flame, trimmed right, has that soft halo like cloth pulled straight from a warm press. It swings with the ship, a gentle metronome that keeps no one awake and lulls everyone anyway. On the desk beneath it, the quill rests across the ink jar like a gymnast who trusts the beam. A scrap of chart shows a shoal with a name that sounds like a lullaby. If you listen, there's the quietest music, a fife from the next deck, or perhaps only the whistle of wind along the shrouds. One last smile before we go. In this age, a well-kept ship is the original productivity app. Clean interface, responsive design, excellent sync across devices, sails. Daily maintenance keeps everything running. Scrape, pitch, mend, check rigging, count biscuit, avoid signing the biscuit. Crews who treated housekeeping as strategy often did very well indeed. Sometimes the difference between legend and late arrival is just whether someone remembered to hang the spare blocks, where hands can find them in the dark. You can take one more breath of the harbour, that sleepy stew of salt, tar, onion, citrus, and something like warm rope. The bell will ring again, not loud, just enough to let the tide know it's wanted. The clerk will return with his ledger in the morning. A new crew will ask the wind for an opinion. The lantern will still be here, small and steadfast, ready to float the night like a little boat of day. And when you close your eyes, you carry it with you. A light behind glass, swaying, the sea written in its flame. When the ship moves, it says yes. When the ship rests, it says home. Evening arrives the way a kind hand draws a curtain. Slow, sure, and considerate of anyone drifting towards sleep. Rigging lines darken to charcoal threads against a lilac sky. Gulls fold their opinions and perch on pilings like punctuation that has decided to rest. On the quarterdeck, a small congregation forms without fuss. It is not a rally, not a drill. It is something like neighbours pulling chairs into a circle after supper. You feel the decks tilt as a suggestion rather than a demand. Someone sets a tin cup on a coil of rope. Someone else smooths a sheet of paper beneath a belaying pin so the breeze won't turn law into origami. The ship's lantern, our old friend, casts a warm halo over the page. Oil breathes in the brass. The glass holds the glow like a bowl holds soup. If your day began with a phone asking you to accept updated terms, you already understand the mood. Tonight is the signing of the ship's articles, the quiet constitution of this floating village. The quartermaster holds the paper with the same care a baker gives a proofing loaf. He clears his throat, not the kind that silences a room, just the kind that suggests we begin while the wick is steady. A captain stands nearby. He does not loom, he leans, which is better. His coat remembers wind, and his hands remember work, the knuckles shiny the way rope makes them. He will not preside over this entire meeting, and he knows it. Authority tonight is a shared garment, worn by turns. Think of a group chat where the admin can be replaced with a raised eyebrow and a vote. Think of a porch where everyone's voice is sized to fit the evening. At sea, the captain's voice is the one you follow when storm or chase makes a single mind necessary. The rest of the time, the quartermaster keeps the key to ordinary hours. provisions, disputes, the arithmetic of a day. It is a balance built not for drama, but for sleep. The quartermaster begins to read. The words are plain and stitched together with fairness. Everyone shall have a say in matters of moment, he says, and the way he says it makes the deck feel larger. In danger, storm, chase. The sharp questions ships put to one another, the captain commands. In peace, the quartermaster keeps the ledger and settles quarrels before they can grow teeth. Shares of any prize will follow a pattern everyone knows in advance. A portion for the captain, a portion for the quartermaster, a fair share for each hand according to the work he or she does. If anyone is hurt, the ship acknowledges the cost. A sum for a lost arm, a sum for a leg, something for an eye. These numbers vary from ship to ship, but the idea is the same. A cushion against bad luck. Candles go dark at a certain hour, so oil lasts and tempers soften. Games are welcome. Cheating is not. Theft from a crewmate is a crack in the hull and treated as such. There is room for music, for laughter, for a joke told twice if it improves with telling. It sounds almost domestic, and that is the point. A pirate ship is an experiment in order, not chaos. On a navy ship, discipline falls from above like rain, and sailors try to stay dry beneath it. On many merchantmen, wages are weather promised, delayed, remeasured when the owner's mood changes. Here, the code is a neighbourly fence. You can lean on it and talk to the person next door. It has a gate for storms and a simple latch for sunny days. It is not a utopia. The sea is allergic to those. But it is a structure you can sleep under without waking to new rules each morning. The lantern's wick gets a trim. The flame answers with a rounder glow. The quartermaster reads a last clause about lights out and the respect due to the hammock hour. He lowers the paper. For a moment there is only the hush of the hull and the whisper of canvas easing against the mast. Then the captain steps forward, not to claim the room, but to acknowledge it. He says a few words about danger spoken without thunder. In a squall, he explains, the ship must move like a single thought. Sails must come in or go out with no debate longer than a heartbeat. A chase requires a spine. You commit or you don't. In those instants, he asks for trust, not because he is grand, but because a rudder cannot argue with the wheel and expect to stay on speaking terms with the sea. When the squall passes or the chase ends, won, lost, or sensibly refused, his voice shrinks back to the size of one voice among many. The crew knows this. The captain knows they know. That mutual knowledge is a kind of ballast no storm can find. The quartermaster's turn returns like the tide. He speaks of provisions, flour, salt meat, peas, onions, sometimes citrus when fortune smiles, and of the storeroom, which is more church than closet. He speaks of the chalk slate where shares and stores are marked for all to see. He speaks of values placed on goods taken in a prize, guns, powder, canvas, coils of rope, barrels of sugar and tobacco, bolts of cloth that make merchants' eyes shine, small boxes that make sailors curious. He will tally with the patience of a reef, and any hand can watch the math assemble itself in chalk and decision. This transparency is a luxury on land. At sea, it is ordinary courtesy. You think of wages, of the feeling of money turning abstract when it's trapped in someone else's notebook. The share system is a different weather. It promises a rhythm you can count with your hands. When a prize is sold or swapped in port, the coin comes to the deck and is divided exactly as the articles said it would be when the oil was new in the lantern and hope had just changed into agreement. The captain's portion is a little more than a common hand's, sometimes only a little more if the crew is stern about equality. The quartermaster receives enough to acknowledge his arithmetic and his patience. Specialists who keep the ship alive, the carpenter who knows how to stop a leak, the gunner who knows how to keep powder dry without strangling everyone with rules, the boatswain who knows which rope is which even when the deck is dark, receive a fraction more because skill is a sale in its own right. A surgeon, when one is aboard, is rewarded because mending a body is a trick we never stop admiring. Everyone else, the steady hands that lift and tie and watch and sing, receives one share, which is another way of saying you have one voice in the life we're making here. Someone asks, as someone always does, about injury. The quartermaster answers in a tone a schoolteacher might use when comforting a clever child who worries about things too soon. We have thought of that. Lose a right arm, and you are paid as if the ship itself owes you a debt. The left arm less, because most hands favour the right at rope and block, though a few aboard demonstrate ambidexterity the way some people whistle through their teeth. A leg is worth its own number because balance is an art at sea, an eye another. Not charity, the quartermaster says, but recognition, a way the ship promises to carry those who have carried it. The lantern seems to glow warmer as he speaks. That might be the oil, but everyone prefers to think it's the spirit of the thing. A murmur says it is time to sign. The paper is lifted from rumour into record. The quill is dipped. A few aboard sign their names in a script taught long ago by a teacher with chalk-dusted sleeves. More make marks, often the same mark made for marriages and leases and promises back on shore. The quartermaster sprinkles fine sand to blot the wet ink. Names fixed like stars. Even the belaying pin seems proud to be a paperweight tonight, as if holding a law steady is nobler than holding a sail line. The captain signs last, not because he is grand, but because the crew's marks build the ladder he climbs onto the page. He does not flourish the quill. He places his name with the neatness of a man who trusts tidy things. Then he steps back and becomes simply a person again, useful in a gale, knowledgeable about knots, occasionally funny when the hour needs it. Someone rattles a dice cup, not to gamble, but to bless the room with the sound of chance behaving itself. Dice talk to probability. Tonight probability promises to be polite. A fife licks a melody from somewhere forward. Hammocks unroll with the sigh of canvas remembering how to become cradle. The first watch takes places along the rail and above in the shrouds. Voices fall to the softness a ship uses at bedtime. The code, though, does not go to sleep. It keeps breathing under everything. In the galley, the cook sets aside a small portion of onions for tomorrow, and mutters that the captain will receive no extra slices for charm alone. In the shadow by the mainmast, two crewmates who bumped shoulders earlier in the day exchange a glance and let it go. The quartermaster's stare is a gentle tide that wears down grudges. Near the ladder, a woman in a plain shirt oils a marlin spike with a careful hand. She is nobody's ornament and everybody's colleague. At the forepeak, a boy barely beard-worthy traces his mark with a fingertip on the dry paper edge. Not to boast, but to reassure himself that he is as real as the rope in his palm. You wonder how the captain's power can be so tall in 1 hour and so level in the next. The answer is the vote. The ship carries in its hold the possibility of choosing again. No one speaks of it as a threat. It's simply a tool, like a spare block, sitting where everyone can see it. A captain who chases too recklessly will hear the wood of the deck change tone when he walks. A quartermaster who counts in a way that favours friends over fairness will watch the slate become a mirror and find the crew looking at him over his own numbers. Votes happen under lantern light or sun, with hands lifted or stones dropped into a hat, or voices speaking one by one. The method matters less than the feeling. Power flows both ways along this deck and everyone can swim. There is a story the boatswain likes to tell, a gentle parable stitched from scraps of truth, about a night when two sails appeared at the edge of the world. One promised rich cargo and a long chase into weather with unhappy ideas. The other promised modest goods and a short conversation with minimal drama. The captain's eyes did their arithmetic. The quartermaster's chalk had already drawn the numbers large. The crew voted. They took the smaller ship and in the morning divided enough coin to quiet the usual jokes and buy the oranges a few throats were dreaming of. Later, when the weather that had been crouching in the dark sprang at the horizon, the crew pretended not to notice which choice they had avoided. Luck, they said, which is another word for listening carefully enough to call good sense by a prettier name. Discipline lives here, but she keeps house kindly. Fights are discouraged, not because anyone aboard has become a saint, but because hands are needed more than hard feelings. If tempers slip and a punch finds a jaw, the quartermaster will frown in the way a carpenter frowns at a bent nail, annoyed at the waste. Apologies are accepted like tools returned to their peg. Theft from a crewmate is a deeper matter. It can tear the fabric of a small world. The articles speak plainly on it, and the ship enforces those lines in a way that leaves no bruised speech to sing about in taverns. Cheating at dice is treated with a seriousness some on land reserve for High Council meetings. It is not about the pennies, it is about the trust that allows pennies to feel like enough. The lantern swings gently and shows you another small ritual. Sometimes, when a prize is taken without fuss, a surrendered chest, a transfer of barrels, a civilized exchange of papers, the quartermaster will sweep the deck of minutes as if they were crumbs. He will count aloud as he touches each thing. 1, 2, 3 bolts of cloth, 1 cask that says it is full and probably is, 2 good coils of rope that smell of tar and promise. No one interrupts. The chalk will soon mirror the words, and the words will soon become the division, and the division will soon become a row of coins on a table that used to hold biscuit and now holds fortune. It is astonishing how quiet joy can be when it is ordinary. New hands come aboard and learn the tone as if it were a refrain. A free black sailor with a scar that looks like a question mark on his forearm ties a bowline with elegant speed and is given the job that needs elegant speed. An indigenous pilot who reads reefs like text lays a finger across the chart and hums the path of a safe night passage. A woman who once sold fish on a wharf and now knows the weight of a sheet in a crosswind takes her trick at the helm and keeps the wake as straight as a stitched seam. Some sign names, some make marks. The paper does not care. The lantern makes them all the same colour of gold. The watch bells tally the hours. There is a rule in the articles about the dog watches, the 2 short evening watches that shuffle who sleeps when, so that no one forever owns sunset or always misses the deep night's cool. Fairness here is not ornery, it is ergonomic. It saves backs and souls the way a good hammock saves bones. You climb into your own canvas cradle and feel the day glide off you the way water flees a duck's back. The ship breathes, the lantern hums. Above, a fife searches for a tune and catches one from the wind. A whisper of trouble finds the deck one night, as trouble likes to do. 2 spoons, very similar, and one suddenly not where a cook is certain he left it. The matter is small enough to be funny and large enough to become unfunny by morning if ignored. The quartermaster sits with both parties at the edge of the galley where steam behaves like an opinion. He listens, he nods, he measures the men's voices against what he knows of them. He peers into a barrel as if the spoon might be hiding there for a joke. Finally he assigns a temporary spoon and a quiet apology, and writes a note on the slate that reads, in essence, "Check your pockets before sermons." The cook laughs once and forgives twice. The ship moves on. It is ridiculous and exactly the sort of civic maintenance that keeps a community from waking to thorns. Sailors speak sometimes drowsily of other ships where the rules are shouted from above and enforced with a taste for spectacle. The stories arrive like clouds, kill-hauling whispered, marooning murmured, punishments more famous than they may be common. Our crew listens and lets the stories pass like a squall too distant to matter. Their articles have teeth if needed, but they prefer to chew bread, not bone. In this world, reputation works hard on everyone's behalf. Treat a surrendered ship decently, and the rumour will do future work for you. Flags raised at the right moment will persuade faster than powder. A fair quartermaster and a steady captain are worth more to courage than a magazine full of shot. Sleep comes easier when cruelty is not hobby. The democratic habit seeps into unimportant hours. Someone proposes polishing the brass on Thursdays instead of Wednesdays, because the light is better and the mood less tragic. Hands rise, the motion passes. Someone else asks whether the fiddler might be excused from the next morning's first watch if he plays an extra set tonight for the sake of morale and feet. The captain looks at the quartermaster. The quartermaster looks at the crew. A compromise floats like a gull between 2 pilings and lands where everyone can admire it. Flowers of small consent bloom everywhere. They smell like sanity. One night, far from any shore that remembers how to be a roof, the sea comes up with a trick. Steep little waves slap from 2 directions as if arguing. The captain's face becomes weather in answer. He calls for a reef in the mainsail. The voice he keeps in a drawer marked only when needed, sliding out like a blade that prefers to stay sheathed. The crew moves as if connected by thread. The quartermaster, who does not shine in storms the way the captain does, shines at the edges of them. He checks the lashing on the water casks. He sees a boy glance the wrong way and taps a shoulder to adjust his gaze. He notices the lantern's wick is too fat and trims it without ceremony, so the light stays round and kind. Afterward, when the waves stop quarrelling and the moon decides the sea is smooth enough for company, The captain's voice returns to its porch size. He fixes a bit of rigging himself in the dark, because authority goes down best with humility. The crew teases him about the knot as if he were ordinary. He answers as if he were. Land drifts by, sometimes loud and sometimes secretive. The ship noses into a cove. The crew goes ashore 2 by 2 to fetch water and oranges and a rumour or two. The articles come with them like pockets. No one is to disappear without a word. No one is to sell the ship's cable for drink money, a rule older than any one sailor and wiser than all of them combined. In a small tavern with sand on the floor to catch spills, someone asks a fiddler to play. He does. He pays for his drink with a coin whose face has seen too many purses to remember its first sovereign, and no one asks it to. Back aboard, the quartermaster chalks the stores. Water freshened, onions refreshed, rumour acquired in amounts sufficient for 3 days. He writes a line about a possible convoy passing the Windward Passage in a week's time. Targets safer than most, watchers thicker than cloth, odds not flattering. He does not make the decision. He sets the table. The crew will gather and talk about it under the lantern, each voice taking a turn the way a loom takes threads and makes them into something warmer than their sum. They will remember the last time they chased odds, and what they learned about luck and about themselves. They will vote. They will abide. The captain sometimes keeps a private journal, not of confessions, but of wins and temperaments. He notes that Tom laughs when the lines go right, that Sarah does not sing but hums the ship steady, that the young lad with the question mark scar is learning the trick of tying with eyes closed. He notes where the quartermaster pauses before laying chalk to slate, the way a writer pauses before committing a sentence to paper forever. He does not let this book become a tyranny. He uses it the way you use memory when you are kind. You lie again in your hammock and think of the first time someone took a sheet of paper and decided to make a small people out of names. The paper was never the power. The power was the unusual promise that the paper would mean what it said tomorrow as well as tonight. That the vote could hand a key to one person and then take it back without breaking anyone's hands. You picture the quill, the sand, the belaying pin, the slate, the chalk, the tin cup sweating in the lantern's circle of light. You picture the quartermaster's patient ledger face and the captain's weather voice, and, between them, the crew, this plural that feels at last like a single thing. You sleep because order has been made beautiful. There is a last gentle bit of business before the wick lowers. In the corner by the companionway, someone reads the articles aloud again for the benefit of 2 who joined at dusk from a fishing boat that had opinions about wages. The words run as smoothly as rope through a clean block. The newcomers nod at the parts about injury, at the parts about games, at the parts about lamps extinguished at a reasonable hour so the stars are not offended. They sign their marks and look at their hands as if surprised to find belonging is so light. The lantern swings. The sea says something the hull understands. The night settles its hand on the ship's head the way a parent settles a hand on a child's brow. We have made a little household of consent and expectation and jokes about spoons. We have chosen an admin, and we have kept the password in the chalk where all can see. We have agreed to be brave efficiently and cautious with style. In the morning we will practice what we promised tonight. We will sail, we will watch, we will count, we will vote. We will eat stew thick with onions and the satisfaction of arithmetic that adds up. Night has its own harbour, and you're in it now. The ship a quiet inn with no street, only a path of moon laid down on water for travellers who prefer silver roads. The lantern breathes in its brass cradle, a small sun that understands bedtime. Canvas mutters, rope exhales, and somewhere aft, a spoon gently kisses the lip of an iron pot, as if assuring supper that it did a fine job. The world is hushed, but not empty. This is the comfortable middle of a voyage, the long humane stretch between alarms, where living is an art and the sea is a house with moving walls. Your day on a pirate sloop in the Caribbean begins not with coffee, though a handful of ships know the smell, but with bells and the particular flavour of morning air that tastes of salt and wood and the faintest onion from last night's stew. The bell strikes, and the sound hangs like a ribbon, thin and bright, finding its way along the deck. Watches change with a choreography so worn in it looks like coincidence. One sailor passing a coil of line as if it weighed nothing, another handing over a spyglass that still remembers the warmth of the last pair of hands. A cat, the unofficial bosun of morale, steps precisely over a sleeping man's hair and arranges itself in a coil of rope the way perfection prefers to pose. You stretch once, twice, and the hammock answers, forgiving your spine for the day it is about to spend being useful. Food is the first story the day tells. The galley is not a kitchen the way a house has a kitchen. It is an iron-bellied box with a caged fire, a belly that purrs when the coals are encouraged and sulks when a wave thinks too highly of itself. On small vessels, the fire is banked like a patient cat, ash drawn up around it, so the morning coaxing is part flint, part persuasion. The cook mutters to the tinder as if it owed a debt, and the tinder, like many debtors, decides to behave when the right voice arrives. Soon a copper kettle murmurs, an iron pot lifts a sleepy steam that smells of pea and pork and the sweet humility of onion. You stand near the hatch, letting the warmth wash over your hands, and a wooden spoon, worn to a crescent by decades of stirring, touches the pot as gently as a violin bow. The biscuit appears, square and beige and determinedly itself. It is not here to flaunt. It is here to be reliable, to keep, to resist the sea's idea of damp. A good biscuit is hard enough to start rumours and softens beautifully in the stew if given patience. You dip your piece just long enough to convince it to be agreeable. The cook says nothing, which is his way of admitting you have behaved well. On a miraculous day, someone produces a lime, sliced so thin you could read a love letter through it, and drifts the bright coins into the pot so the whole ship suddenly tastes a little like good advice. There are moments in the Caribbean when fruit is not just food, it is a sermon on the subject of being alive. Sailors who have gone weeks without it can feel their bodies lean toward the citrus, the way flowers lean toward windows. No one speaks of scurvy the way you might in a medical pamphlet. They speak instead of stiffness and gums that complain, and the appearance of oranges quiets the complaints faster than eloquence. Water comes from casks that breathe slowly like animals sleeping. There is a clean wood smell to it and a memory of tar because everything on board keeps a little tar the way a town keeps a little dust. Water is portioned. On honest days it is easy. On difficult ones it arrives in a tin cup with a look that admits there are limits to everything, even generosity. Rum is there too, quieter than the stories say. Much of it is watered, turned into grog with a squeeze of citrus when the stars are smiling and a scrape of sugar when the stores look like celebration might be affordable. The point of the water is health, and the point of the rum is mood, and the point of both is that the ship would like you here tomorrow. Between the morning bells and the noon sun, the day arranges its chores the way you might arrange errands on a street you know by heart. There is line to splice and line to whip, 1,000 ends that ask to be finished with pride. A sailor pulls a length of hemp through a tar pot, fingers glossed black, the smell like warm roofs and patient work. Another sits cross-legged with a sail, heavy as a confession in his lap, needle the length of a child's hand gliding through canvas that has learned to accept mending as a kind of love. Beeswax kisses the thread and makes it obedient. A third rubs a blade with oil until it gleams like a whisper. On a good day, the ship has exactly the tool you want exactly where it should be. On a less good day, you improvise, which is a word sailors pronounce as experience. The watches divide the world as surely as days and nights. 4 hours on, 4 hours off, except for the dog watches in early evening, which are split in two to shuffle fate's deck and be kind to those who would otherwise always miss sunset or always miss the deep midnight's cool. You begin to feel the bells not as commands but as punctuation, the sea writing its paragraph while you provide commas and the occasional elegant semicolon. Your sleep tracker is a bosun with a whistle and opinions. It is difficult to argue with a whistle. When your turn-off watch arrives, the hammock is a miracle disguised as a bag. Sailors who have known beds sometimes miss a bed's obstinate solidity. Sailors who have known hammocks long enough prefer their mercy. The canvas is hung between beams with a sag that looks doubtful and proves perfect. You lie diagonally, the trick taught by someone who called you friend before they decided whether you were. Your weight settles and the ship rocks you as if you're a small problem the ocean has chosen to solve by rhythm. The air smells of rope and salt and the mysterious laundry of other people's clean shirts. Somewhere an hourglass turns over with a hiss like a small snake. Time starts again with good manners. There is music here, of course. Not the gigantic sea shanties the theatre adores. Those belong as much to later centuries as to now. But the older habit of men and women turning effort into sound. A line halls better to a chorus. A capstan hums in tune when voices agree. You hear call and response tunes that have learned to keep time with elbows. You hear choruses that like to wander into a second verse when the wind is friendly and work remembers it is not a tyrant. A fife hides somewhere near the foremast and comes out at dusk to chase gulls from the rigging, with melodies too cheerful for birds. A drum appears on days when a little thunder would be good for the mood. A jaw harp twangs in the corner like a personal weather report. The fiddle is the star, a little sword wooden animal that cries and laughs and makes sailors' feet think of shore even when they are not interested in shore just now. One of the quieter facts of sea life. The fiddle has more seniority than many admirals. It has seen more captains come and go than any flag. Stories oil the hours, too. Someone tells a tale about a reef that winks at night. Someone else adjusts the tale so the reef winks on the other side of the island where he prefers it. There is talk of a shoal, whose sand smells of cinnamon if you bring it up on a tallowed lead and put your nose to it with scholarly concentration. There are jokes, the cordial kind that live on a ship without waking the angry kind. Some jokes are about officers in general. Some are about commas in particular. A few are about the cook's spoon, which is the ship's true treasure, and must be placated with compliments, or it loses salt at critical moments. It is hard to explain to land people how a spoon can become a monarch. Sailors do not have to explain. They live under its benevolent rule. You live by weather, but not the opera of weather. Mostly the domestic sort. The trade winds are the ship's favourite habit, arriving from the east with the reliability of a friend who knows your door does not lock. You trim the sails and they fill like lungs discovering a joke. The sea's surface has moods you can read like a person's face. Little cat's paws when the breeze is teasing, a nap flat calm when the ocean would like you to try patience instead of progress. Calms are difficult for the impatient. The ship responds by cleaning itself. Lines are coiled so precisely a philosopher would approve. The brass receives a cloth until it can see its little soul. The deck is scrubbed with sand and stone until it smells like the inside of a barrel where hope is kept. Someone counts the musket balls and someone else the spoons, which are equal measures of preparedness. Squalls slide across the horizon like a frown walking briskly. The captain looks, and his eyes narrow the way a reader's eyes do when a sentence could go either way. He speaks, and the crew spirits a reef into the mainsail so fast you think perhaps you imagined it. Rain arrives with the courtesy of a guest who brings a dish to share. It washes the deck, sweetens the casks through canvas funnels, and then goes on to vex someone else with its enthusiasm. Lightning decides not to. You breathe again. The sea's reminders are firm, not cruel, almost always. There is a ritual to noon that sailors defend with the seriousness of a festival. The sun climbs to the top of the sky and stands there for a moment, a governor deciding which law to sign. The navigator brings out the instrument, a cross-staff if he's old-fashioned, a backstaff if he favours his eyes, polished wood with measurements that look like music. He sights the sun in a way that keeps his vision safe, scribbles an angle in a worn book, and confers with a sand glass and a chip log that has been dragging through the water at the end of a line marked with knots, hence, truthfully, the word knots. The numbers talk to each other and turn into miles and minutes, and a little confident arrow on the chart. No one cheers. The ship is modest about miracles. A second plate of stew appears for the man with the book. This is how gratitude works at sea. Hot food, second helpings, a seat that doesn't fight you. Clothes are mended as carefully as sails, because a shirt is also a kind of sail, catching breezes of approval and warmth. A needle, thick as a matchstick and curved like a smile, goes in and out of linen that learned the Atlantic by listening. Fingers become thimbles in a pinch. Patchwork makes an honest garment. A new shirt on deck can feel like bragging. Tar sneaks into fabric with the persistence of gossip. and you wear it with pride because it means your hands were where they should be. If a windcap is found to be missing, the entire ship becomes a small search party, and then, when it is found in the place it should never have been, a theatre of forgiveness. It is difficult to stay angry at a hat you have just rescued. Daily health is mostly wisdom collected from elders, where elders can mean anyone still walking who's watched enough storms go by to learn their grammar. Sun is a blessing, and also a stern aunt. You cover your neck, you tie a cloth over ears that never forgive a week of wind. Salt bites. You rinse when you can in rainwater, for pride and for comfort. Teeth are a quiet project. A bit of cloth, a pinch of ash, and patience turn into a smile that outlives the voyage. Wounds are for the surgeon if there is one, and for vinegar and thread if there isn't. People step carefully, not because the wood is treacherous, but because they made a promise to their own feet and would like to keep it. When fever comes aboard, and it does, some voyagers more than others, there is a little island of shade and water and rest set aside for the person who needs it, and a prayer tucked into the creases of every hand that passes the cup. Sailors word prayers differently than land people. They say, "He'll ride it out," and mean faith. Leisure looks like work if you don't know the rules. A man sits with a rope, and his fingers make a mat out of it. A circle within a circle that keeps a bottle from knocking itself silly. Another carves a bit of wood into a fish that fools no one and charms everyone. A woman braids hair into something that answers to the name of tidy, in a wind that prefers chaos. Tobacco appears, twisted by hand into something that looks like a thought. Cards are a universe of luck that opens in a corner near the galley and closes when the quartermaster strolls past and gently asks how the universe is treating its inhabitants. Dice tap and click, and remind you that chance likes to be invited, never dragged. On a fine afternoon when the wind is doing its job in a way that leaves you surplus breath, you might find yourself at the bow looking down at a pair of dolphins who have joined the ship because ships are interesting. Their backs are the colour of pewter and silk, and they slice the water with the grace of an argument you cannot lose. Someone insists that they are good luck, and the ship agrees, because sometimes luck is simply being accompanied by beauty for a while. Flying fish pop out of the sea like ideas, reckless and brief. Once in a long while one miscalculates and lands aboard. The cook claims it with the solemnity of law and a smile sharp enough to peel an orange. Supper improves. Ashore is a different chapter, but the ship brushes against it often enough to know the words. There are coves where fresh water falls into the sea, as if one blue were signing a contract with another. There are beaches where cleaning a hull is called careening, and looks like a ship sleeping on its side while friends pick barnacles off its skin and tell it it's still beautiful. There are towns where your boots come away sticky with molasses, your nose learns to read a street by its shops, tar and pitch and rope in the north wind, bread and salt fish in the east, rum and shouting floating freely wherever rumour suspects good company. There are markets where a basket of limes costs a story, and a promise to return the basket. There are people whose knowledge of reefs and currents is a music you wish you could write down. Instead, you remember it in the soles of your feet and the angle of your hands. Coins change pockets. Politeness changes lives. Back at sea, the evening acts like a practiced stagehand and draws the light down until only the lanterns carry it. The cook settles the lid of the pot with a final affectionate tap. The bell speaks. The first dog watch slips into the second. In the narrowing light, the ship's instruments feel older and wiser than they did at noon. The lead line for sounding the depth, the tallow on its base ready to bring up a pinch of the seabed for you to taste and name, the glass that runs its sand in 4 neat halves of an hour, the compass whose needle sings a steady note only it can hear. You begin to understand why some sailors call tools by their names, the way people call friends by theirs. It is a recognition that gratitude has handles. Night watches have their own society. The helmsman stands at the tiller with a posture that says he is patient because patience is his profession. A lookout in the bows feels like the first person who will learn if the world has decided to visit. The sails make a soft flannel sound, flapping only when someone gets sentimental and forgets to trim them. Stars arrange themselves into patterns that you foolishly think will stay the same, and then they do, which is sometimes the kindest trick the sky plays. The North Star hangs at a respectable height and watches without blinking. The southern horizon glows when islands hide there, a rumour of lanterns and cook fires and laughter that is yours or someone else's, and either way you wish them well. Conversation on night watch is sparse and delicious. Words are expensive at midnight. You spend them on the right things: weather, memory, the way a certain person once tied a bowline upside down, and the crew clapped softly so as not to wake the sails. You laugh, but only a little, because laughter travels farther at night and you do not wish to wake the ocean. You learn to love the language of small sounds, a block creaking like an old man thinking, the cat making a decision about which shoulder to bless, the lantern whispering as its oil calms the flame. If the fife appears at this hour, it plays a tune with fewer notes and more patience. There are days when the ship is all efficiency, and days when it's all waiting, and most days are a well-mannered marriage of the two. When a squall has scrubbed the sky and the sun returns, everything seems newly invented. Rope with the courtesy to be strong, canvas with the ambition to be wind, wood with the grace to float without complaint. The captain walks the deck and touches a rail that has just been holy stoned, and smiles as if he had discovered cleanliness personally. The quartermaster counts 3 coils of spare line and places them so that in darkness they will be exactly where they must be. The carpenter speaks to the mast with a mallet and listens for an answer only he can hear. Learning to hear wood is a talent, like learning to hear lies. You bless the men and women who have it. One mild afternoon, with the sea behaving like a good sheet on a clothesline, the crew practices boarding drills with a humour that admits they would rather never perform them in earnest. Grapnels are coiled. Voices practice the words that persuade faster than powder. Feet test their speed across the deck, not to excite the blood, but to be sure the body remembers distance without needing to measure. The captain stands aside and watches, not as a judge, but as a tailor watching cloth become garment, interested in fit, calm about flaws. When the drill ends, there is water and a slice of something sweet disguised as bread. The ship does not confuse practice with omen. It confuses nothing with anything. It is the most literal thing you will ever love. Some afternoons the crew gambles with weather and loses in a charming way. A sheet of rain comes out of a sky that looked innocent, and everyone grins at the same time, the way people grin when a child announces a plan that is both ridiculous and beautiful. The wet falls so straight and determined that buckets fill as if an invisible clerk were conducting inventory, and you stand in it with your face lifted and your mouth open, laughing as if water had become a song. Later the sun returns and the deck smokes in small curls that look like thoughts leaving a warm head. There are quiet heartbreaks, even in the gentle middle. A letter written at anchor, folded into a small square and tucked into a ditty bag with the faith of a saint, naps there for months because the ship never meets the friend it was supposed to meet, who could have carried it to shore. The person who wrote it opens it one night under the lantern and reads it back to himself, and finds he recognises the handwriting, but not the man who used to have those plans. He rewrites the letter so it is about weather and stew and a cat, which are subjects letters can always manage. He sleeps better. The sea, for all its reputation, is mostly a good supervisor. It likes things done properly and forgives mistakes that come from effort. It does not forgive carelessness, but it understands distraction. People on a ship take gentle care of one another not because they have become angels, but because they have realised they live in each other's tomorrow. If you put a line away sloppy, the person who needs it in the dark may be a stranger until you hear their voice and realise it is your own the next night. That sort of realisation tidies a deck faster than a sermon. When the moon swells, the ship stays up a little later, like a child granted an additional story. There is dancing, soft-footed so the deck's feelings won't be hurt. A hornpipe appears, because some joy insists on shape, and the fiddle holds the steps together the way a good baker holds a loaf upright. Even the quartermaster claps, which is how you know no one is keeping accounts after hours. The lanterns applaud by existing. Sometimes a parrot shows up on a visiting vessel and refuses to leave. On this ship, if one appears, it is treated as a visiting dignitary for an evening, and reminded by morning that the cat already holds the important office. The cat agrees with this policy, and then, as all days are contractually obliged to do, yours winds down. The pot settles into a self-congratulatory glow. Tin bowls stack upside down with the blooming pride of mushrooms after rain. A sailor light fingers a fragment of biscuit to the cat, who considers the gesture legal but not optimal, and accepts it anyway in the spirit of diplomacy. The lamps are checked, oil sufficient, wick trimmed, flame behaving. At the stroke of the agreed hour, the quartermaster nods and the ship obeys. Lights kept low, then lower, then low enough that the stars feel invited aboard. A breeze enters through the companionway as if it has been given a key. In your hammock you perform the ceremony of pockets, which is to place nothing of value in them because pockets have their own ethics. Your ditty bag receives the day's little coin, and the bit of ribbon that once tied a parcel you opened in your head, if not in your hands. You roll to the diagonal, and let the canvas remind you why humans invented cradles, and kept inventing them even after they had chairs. The timbers talk like fathers who have learned to whisper. Far away a whale exhales, and the sound reaches you like an old friend's sigh through a wall. The ship breathes you, and you breathe the ship, and if you must call this home you will not misname it. Sleep comes, but not before the lantern tells the last paragraph. Its flame is smaller than stories say, but steadier. It does not leap, it rounds. It does not announce, it abides. On the table beneath it, a lead line waits, its tallow clean, its depth marks honest. A compass rests, needle pointing to a promise it has never seen, and nonetheless believes. A spoon dries, edge catching the light as if it remembers the lemons. The quartermaster's slate stands washed for tomorrow, space holding its breath for numbers, and the fiddle, leaned against the bulkhead with a cloth over its face, seems to listen to the sound of water talking to wood, and smiles a wooden smile. You will wake to bells and onion again, to rope and tar and laughter at a joke that survived the night, to the sober joy of work that matters. You will taste the salt the way a person tastes language. You will forget that land resents being compared to water. You will think of the shore sometimes and not want it yet. This is the gift of the days between. They do not demand an audience. They ask only to be lived, and in return they give you a ship that behaves like a promise. The story climbs a little into speed. Flags will go up, clever as theatre, hulls will hum. The approach to a prize will look more like a negotiation than a battle, because efficiency prefers conversation. We will raise a colour that means, let's settle this quickly, and if the weather agrees, that is exactly what we'll do. For now, the lantern lowers its voice to a golden whisper, and the night lowers its roof to keep us. The sea is kind enough to sing from far away. The hammock says yes. The spoon says good night. The lantern, our patient companion since the first harbour's dawn, swings once more and pauses, as if remembering the taste of citrus and the sound of soft laughter in a clean galley. It takes its time to dim. It makes no hurry of it. When darkness finally gathers it into the fold, the small circle of glass still holds a memory of light, a ship-shaped ember. You close your eyes and let the long, generous middle of the voyage carry you, because carrying is what it does best. The sea has its own version of a traffic merge. Two wakes slide toward one another, the white lace on top of blue, and somewhere between them lives the moment where a decision becomes a story. On land, you flash a blinker and hope for kindness. Out here, you lift a flag and hope for comprehension. The wind does most of the talking. The rest is cloth, a little theatre, and a great deal of manners dressed up as strategy. The lantern under the companionway throws that familiar pocket of gold across the deck, steady and domestic, as if reminding the ship that even dramas benefit from warm lighting and clean lines. Speed whispers first. Not the shout of speed that tears hair and patience, but the practical quickness of a small sloop whose hull has been scraped clean of barnacles until it feels like polished bone under the hand. Careening is the word, hauling the vessel onto a friendly strip of sand, tipping her like a dozing horse, and working along her flanks with scrapers and tar. It isn't glamorous, it's housekeeping, and it turns a ship into a creature that can pounce without panting. A day spent with pitch and sand saves a week spent with regrets. When the hull is clean, the rudder feels like it is answering a polite invitation. The sails fill and the entire vessel lifts her chin a little, as if someone has just complimented her posture. The captain, sleeves rolled, stands with a spyglass that has learned the weather's pronouns. He does not bark. He hums the deck alive by saying exactly as much as the moment needs. A point to windward, he might say, and the helmsman answers with the kind of subtlety that would be wasted on land but makes the sea nod. Behind him, the quartermaster checks the chalk slate and the powder stores, and the coil of line that will matter if things become complicated in a pleasant way. Complicated is the sea's word for opportunity. It is also the quartermaster's word for paperwork. A flag stirs from its coil. Cloth remembers its last wind the way a cat remembers the last patch of sun. Not every ship relies on the same colours, and few pirates make a habit of wearing their hearts, or skulls, on their sleeves at all hours. A vessel might sail under one nation's flag for a time, tasting the mood of the lanes, then show another when it wishes to be recognised by a particular harbour. Deception is a kind of lighting, useful in the first act but abandoned before the finale. At the decisive moment, the truth goes up the halyard. Sometimes it's a simple black banner, sometimes a red one that says more with colour than ink can, sometimes a device stitched or painted by a hand that didn't mind being remembered. Stories later turn those devices into a uniform. The reality was more neighbourly and less theatrical, like handwriting. Recognisable, but not standardised. Imagine the merchantman ahead. She's not a fortress. She's a wagon with a keel, laden with barrels that sweat sugar and bales that hide tobacco, and parcels of cloth wrapped so earnestly you almost feel bad unwrapping them. Her crew is weary of wage promises and weather. They do not wake each day hoping for a duel. They wake hoping the stew will be different, that the wind will stay true, that the hull will not ask for more water than they've got to give. They see the sloop slide up from leeward, sails clean as a shirt on Sunday, and they feel the quiet arithmetic begin. The warning comes like good etiquette. A gun speaks across the bow, not to wound, but to clear its throat. The sea approves of this civility. It has no patience with theatre that wastes powder. Perhaps the false flag comes down and the honest one goes up, the kind that declares that conversation, not argument, is the plan. Sometimes even that is not necessary. Reputations travel faster than fast hulls. A captain known for reasonable terms and quick departures often finds the world reaching for its ledger before its weapon. Fear is expensive. Efficiency is cheap. Pirates, for all the ink spilled about them, are often thrifty in the ways that matter. Closing the distance is a study in wrists. Sheets are eased, trimmed, eased again. The helmsman keeps his voice small and his attention large. The bow cleaves a path that looks chosen, not discovered. A lead line drops and rises, tallow at its tip remembering sand and shell the way a nose remembers spice. Depth is a comforter you shake before sleep. Grapnels wait, but do not insist. Boarding hooks lean where hands can find them in half-light. They are tools, not intentions. The deck smells of tar and clean wood, and the faint breath of citrus hoarded like a saint's relic. The lantern in the companionway flares once, as if the oil knew the scene wanted a little extra gloss. When the ships speak, it is the quartermaster who carries most of the conversation. He belongs to the realm of inventory and promises are faster than fights. Papers change hands first, because paper has a way of making people behave like the words on it. The merchant captain presents manifests whose margins have been improved by experience. The quartermaster nods, and his hands do that bees dance they do, one to chalk and one to barrel. A small boat may go across with a few hands to help the merchant's crew secure lines and lower the longboat if the talk leans toward transfer. No one is trying to win a painting competition. Everyone is trying to be home by supper. On some days, a captain cultivates drama the way a gardener cultivates herbs, just enough to season the story. A man might tie fuses into his hat and let them smoke a little, so his head seems to glow with ideas, a trick designed less to frighten than to hasten the signature. Another might favour a coat with more buttons than sense. But even the peacocks of the age prefer a quiet end to a loud beginning. The crew knows that powder is heavy, shot is expensive, and wood crowds into splinters when offended. Saving all three is better than any reputation that keeps you awake later. The cleverest captains frighten the least and persuade the most. It is a kind of hospitality, if you can forgive the manners of the invitation. The merchant crew, those who do the lifting and the swabbing and the consoling of lines that feel underappreciated, often find themselves standing aside with relief. They are not cargo. They are not the quarrel. They watch the quartermaster tally casks and bolts and small cases whose weight promises rather more than their looks. A barrel of flour becomes a number, a bundle of cloth becomes another. Tobacco is counted with the attention one gives to an old friend's jokes. Sugar receives a pat like a good dog. Coins, when present, undergo a little ceremony, stacked, admired, briefly felt with the proud pad of the thumb, and then put away where they cannot be accused of distracting the young. The entire scene smells more of commerce than conquest. The sound of chalk is the loudest part. Once in a while the merchant captain asks for a receipt. He may phrase it differently, a note perhaps, stating what changed hands and under what weather. The quartermaster obliges if it serves the future. These scraps travel later into governors' offices and insurers' desks and become the sort of paper that allows the world to pretend it is orderly. Not every exchange leaves a paper trail, but the ones that do help everyone sleep, which is a kind of charity. There are also choices to be made that have nothing to do with barrels. A handful of the merchant crew may ask to join the visitors, and the permission is sometimes granted. A sailor with bruised patience and calloused skill is currency aboard any ship. Consent is the coin. Compulsion is poor seamanship. A few men, and more quietly, a few women change decks this way, carrying with them talents that are immediately useful and songs that take a watch to learn. Names are written on the slate, marks are made on the paper, hammocks find new occupants whose snores fit into the ship's song as if they'd been practicing offstage. What of violence? It exists, but not the way plays perform it. Sometimes a bluff fails, or a proud captain chooses to prove a point, or weather itself turns the scene into something unrulier than anyone ordered. Then barked orders ship sails and a gun or two asks questions in a more direct grammar. But even in these spikier minutes, the aim is almost always to end the conversation as quickly as politeness allows. A mast that stays upright is more precious than a tale that makes drummers work overtime in a tavern. Powder is lavished only in the way you lavish a good coat with careful stitches, sparingly, where it will be admired for its restraint. The sea does not love a brawler. It loves a creature that moves through its moods like a dancer who knows how to bow. When the prize is secure, the business becomes beautifully domestic. A prize crew goes aboard, enough hands to point the captured ship toward a friendly shore or a friendly cove with traders who do not ask inconvenient questions at bedtime. The chosen sailors pack a bag as if for a weekend. A spare shirt, a knife that has already earned its stories, a little tobacco, the lucky bit of ribbon or coin you would swear you don't need until you've left it behind. The merchant captain, relieved and resigned, will sometimes offer advice unasked, where the pumps sulk, which cask the rats prefer, which board bites the bare foot at night. A ship, even a taken one, remains a personality, and personalities deserve introductions. Meanwhile, back on the sloop, the captain and quartermaster confer over the chart with their heads nearly touching. The coast is a lace collar, and the current is a whispered rumour, and the pencil draws a line that honours both. They do not linger on the place where the law keeps its office. They aim instead for the places where business keeps its kitchen. A beach with a certain beach hut, a reef known to hide more than coral, a roadstead that accepts sales receipts in the language of nods. Nassau, when fortunes align with geography, is a harbour that turns negotiations into errands. There are also smaller nooks, friendlier, only if you know their furniture by heart. A well-placed cove is the pirate's version of a back door with a welcome mat. In port the ship behaves like a houseful of ants suddenly in possession of a picnic. Barrels roll, bolts of cloth parade with their own sense of rhythm, metal clinks like someone testing cymbals they can't afford, and the quartermaster's slate grows a frame of numbers that would be beautiful if you did not know they meant work. Discreet traders arrive at the appropriate pace and distance. No one hustles. Hustling is land behaviour. Here the air is thick with salt and cinnamon and the still warm breath of recent rain. Prices are named as if they were old friends, and hands shake in a way that carefully avoids jostling the coin you hope to hold by evening. Somewhere on a balcony, a woman in a linen dress counts slowly along with the sound of barrels and smiles, remembering a sailor who said he'd return by Thursday and almost did. Crew who prefer their luck at sea remain on the sloop, trading their chance at shore for the quiet right to nap in a hammock that is briefly a palace. Others take their coin and their errands ashore, returning with lemons and news and sometimes a shirt loud enough to be audible at 20 paces. A good captain lets them enjoy the day, not because indulgence is a policy, but because morale is a kind of rope that holds better when it is occasionally allowed to relax. The articles on the slate remind everyone of the hour when feet must be clean and eyes clear, and lips free of dramatic stories until the next harbour wants to hear them. The lantern in the cabin approves of this discipline. It burns brighter when people keep their promises. At sea again, the choreography repeats with small, interesting changes. Each chase is a new paragraph written with the same alphabet: wind, wake, cloth, chalk. The captain reads the horizon with a librarian's kindness. The quartermaster reads the crew with a baker's patience. The boatswain makes music with blocks and tackles that would sound like weather to anyone who doesn't know the instrument. The carpenter listens to the mast a little more closely each day, because wood reveals mood in its voice, and mood tells you whether a hard turn will be a dramatic flourish or a dramatic mistake. It is a civilization afloat, calibrated toward minimum fuss for maximum gain, a paradise for tidy minds and brave wrists. Sometimes, though, the lanes play host to a new fashion. A convoy goes by, armed escorts sailing like chaperones at a dance, their uniforms not so much cloth as policy. The pirates watch from a distance and admire the symmetry the way one admires a painting from the doorway. Beautiful, but not for today. There is no shame in waving at an opportunity and letting it pass. The crew's coin does not grow by taking every dare the sea offers. Courage is not a muscle you flex until it tears. It is a gait you learn so you can walk farther without limping. The famous Skull and Crossbones gets its share of gossip in every tavern that sells aspirations with its ale. But aboard a working deck, the flag is less an emblem than a sentence. It says, "Let us be brief." It says, "We will be kind to time if you are kind to sense." Now and then a variant appears, the outline of an hourglass, a heart that bleeds a little for effect. But most of the work is done by the suggestion that the conversation can be short. Merchants understand suggestions, insurers adore them. Legends later dress these flags in drama. Crews in the moment prefer their meaning as practical as a well-lashed barrel. When boarding does happen, it is a ballet performed in boots. Lines fly, hooks bite wood with a polite thump, feet find grip where water pretends it has made everything ungrippable. Two decks become one in the time it takes a gull to become disappointed by a crust. Voices say, "steady," more than they say anything else. The prize crew moves with the authority of people who have rehearsed in their heads, so often they no longer need to think. A man cuts a lashing with the small conservative gesture of a tailor snipping thread. Another lifts a hatch and looks down into a smell that tells him flour lives there and has been talking with salt fish. The quartermaster signs the air with his chalk hand, even when he carries no chalk, because habit is faster than thought. The best raids, the ones the crew remember later with fondness instead of fervour, end with the slow-motion exhale of two ships easing apart, each a little changed, and both still themselves. The merchant sails away lighter, relieved that the danger presented itself and concluded itself with the minimal fuss to which every working person is entitled. The sloop bears her new weight modestly, the way a table bears the weight of supper and refuses credit for the recipe. The sea erases the wakes after a decent interval, like a hospitable host clearing plates before dessert. Afterward comes the meeting that the lantern loves. It's held in that same small parliament of glow and rope and patient faces. The quartermaster sets the day's arithmetic upon the slate and the coin upon the table. The shares flow according to the articles read under this same light on some earlier evening. There is talk, necessarily brief, about who joined, who left, who looked lonely, and might be happier at our mess than at theirs. There's a kind of gossip that becomes mercy at sea. This is the preferred kind. Someone proposes a gift for the surgeon if the ship is blessed with one, a new set of needles, perhaps, or a little parcel of sugar to make his work taste less like iron. No one opposes, Gratitude, like citrus, improves everything and keeps better than you'd think. The ship then returns to her chores, which is where happiness lives. Sails are mended where they asked politely to be mended. Blocks are oiled in the quiet spots where squeak threatens the peace. A coil of line that tried to play dead under the pinrail is gently encouraged to remember its purpose. The cat finds the warmest plank and demonstrates morale. Someone brags about a knot for exactly 3 minutes. Someone else ties it behind his back without looking, and then never mentions it again. The captain writes a few lines in a book you will never read, and the quartermaster adds 2 neat numbers that remind him he likes being the kind of person who adds neat numbers. Not every day offers a prize. Many give only miles. These are the days that turn a crew into people who can face the interesting days without needing to shout. On such afternoons, the flag locker sleeps, the guns nap with their mouths closed, and the ship makes the exact amount of progress that suits its temperament. The helmsman's hands learn the weight of a tiller, the way a lover learns the weight of a shoulder. You watch the horizon, and it watches you back, and neither of you feels obliged to do anything about it. If there is danger at all in this gentle way of taking what the world insists on escorting from one port to another, it hides in complacency. A crew too fond of easy days grows sloppy, and sloppiness is the weather that never receives a forecast. To keep it away, the captain orders a drill with the kind of cheerful seriousness a good teacher keeps for recitations. The crew leaps and laughs and nods without complaining, with the very specific joy of people who have decided that being ready is better than being sorry. When the drill ends, the cook produces something suspiciously festive from the pot, and the cat pretends indifferent while arranging itself closer to the festivities. The winds change now and then. Fashion, policy, treaties signed in rooms where no one can hear the sea. That is for later parts of our story. For now, the lanes are busy, and the little ships thrive by being tidy and brave and courteous, in a way that would surprise a schoolbook and delight a quartermaster. The tactics of the age, seen up close, are a set of small, humane decisions repeated with discipline. Keep the hull clean, keep the rigging ready, show the right flag at the right time, speak with confidence, accept surrender with grace, depart before anyone remembers to dislike you. It's not that different from visiting someone's kitchen and leaving it cleaner than you found it, except that here the kitchen floats and has opinions about wind. Night returns and wraps everything in acceptable velvet. The ship glides in a lane of silver where the moon has laid down a road for anyone willing to believe in roads that move. The flag halyards creak once like old men agreeing. The prize crew's lantern, now far off, makes a second little star on the water, an ember travelling to its next errand. If you listen, you can hear that lantern saying something patient about distance and promises, and how a flame, properly tended, can survive a short loneliness without sulking. Back in our own cabin, the familiar brass breathes. The lantern remembers raids the way a kitchen remembers dinners, by the warmth, not the menu. On the table, the quartermaster's slate has been washed like a conscience. A single figure remains on the corner, a reminder that someone owes someone else a spoon from the galley, and that it will be returned in the morning with appropriate ceremony. The captain's coat hangs by the door, more salt than dye now, and beside it the hat that remains politely unlit. The ship creaks, the safe creaks. The sea says yes in a dozen dialects. You stretch in your hammock, and the canvas says it enjoys being stretched. Tomorrow the sloop may fly no particular colour at all, and sun itself on a blue that refuses drama. Or it may find, at the margin of visibility, a silhouette with the posture of prophet. If that happens, the old efficient ballet will unroll without raising its voice. A flag will lift and lower and lift again. A gun will cough a warning and then subside. Hands will shake, barrels will walk, chalk will teach, and 2 ships will separate with their personalities intact and their schedules, if anything, improved. The story will grow by a paragraph, not a chapter, and the crew will fall asleep early with the special smugness of people who have worked well and left everything exactly where it should be. The lantern does its goodnight in 3 motions. A little trim of the wick so the flame rounds, a breath blown across the glass to let it know it is admired, and the soft, satisfied click of metal that means the night can begin. Outside, the flags furl themselves like swans and sleep on the lines. The hull dreams of beaches that smell of pitch and oranges, The lead line dreams of mud that tells the truth. The quartermaster dreams in numbers that look like stars stitched into a sail. You dream of two wakes meeting and deciding politely which one will pass in front, and in the harbour you keep in your mind, the one from our first night together, the lantern over the desk still shines, because some lights are loyal even when the ship has slipped beyond the bell's polite reach. Its glow is the same glow, whether in a cabin or a beach hut or a prize cruise pocket universe. It swings with the same small wisdom. It says that speed is a courtesy, that persuasion is kinder than spectacle, that a clean hull and a clean conscience are kin. It says, quite reasonably, that bedtime is the best tactic of all. Movies prefer one accent, big hats, and a parrot that files your taxes. Real life prefers a chorus. Step onto our deck on any quiet evening, and you'll hear the sea speaking 12 ways at once. Island lilts soft as linen, Devon vowels that roll like barrels, French clipped bright as scissors, Dutch vowels that sit squarely and do not apologise, Spanish notes that turn corners like a good dancer, West African cadences that feel like drums seen rather than heard. If you linger, you'll hear 100 other temperaments. The shy voice that knows reefs like cousins, the hoarse one that knows too much wind, the voice that has sung for money and now sings for weather. The crew is not a costume, it is a quilt, and every square has its own history stitched into it. Our familiar lantern throws a mild gold onto faces that don't match, and hands that do. The wick has no favourite. This age wears a handful of famous names the way a mantelpiece wears photographs. Well arranged, a little polished, sometimes at angles that flatter. They're worth visiting gently, if only to set them back on the shelf with the dust brushed off. Start with a young man in a coat he tried to keep respectable. Some accounts call him Samuel Bellamy. Some prefer Black Sam, though his hair did most of the work for that nickname. Sources suggest he had a way of talking about fairness that drew men like moths toward a light that stayed pleasant instead of burning. He's remembered for a brief blaze, taking prizes with speed and leaving crews more relieved than ruined, and for a voice that didn't need thunder to carry. His story ends sooner than anyone likes. The sea is an unblinking editor. Tonight we say his name softly and let the lantern keep the bright part. Then there's a figure whose beard achieved its own citizenship. Edward Teach, called Blackbeard later by those who enjoy labelling jars, likely knew exactly how to be seen. Stories say he wove slow match into his hair, little glowing fuses that draw lines of smoke like charcoal on a page, a theatre trick designed to hasten negotiations rather than the opposite. It worked the way good stagecraft works. You remember the hat and not the arithmetic happening behind it. Accounts from his time suggest he valued persuasion over disaster, which makes him more manager than monster. He enjoyed a reputation for being everywhere at once. In truth, he was one man with one weather, and a decent sense of where two currents would disagree politely. We can admire the costume without mistaking it for the person who had to eat stew and sleep like anyone else. We reach for a thread embroidered with a simple skull and two crossed bones. A flag like that exists. Many like it existed. None were the uniform they later became. Sailors favoured variation the way a painter favours brush strokes that only he recognises. One captain's banner wore an hourglass to say time is watching. Another's held a heart that bled in a tasteful symbolic way. A third kept things as plain as a blank page with bad intentions. There was no central office approving designs. If someone later prints a catalogue, mind them kindly and then mind the wind instead. The flag was mostly a sentence written in cloth. Let us settle this quickly. On a night like this, you can see how the black catches starlight and turns sternness into style. We do not leave the women ashore just because stories sometimes do. Anne Bonny, Mary Read. The names come with their own weather now, but originally they were only two people doing a difficult job well. Accounts, cautious and lively by turns, suggest both wore men's clothes when it suited the minute, then ordinary linen when the weather needed a different cut. They fought when the fight arrived, and in calmer hours they worked the deck like anyone who respects a sloop's feelings. We needn't embroider the knife. The needle will do. Many tales add bright, sharp scenes that sell well in taverns. We let those pass like storms that would prefer to be noticed. What remains is competence, appetite for fairness, and a refusal to be arranged by other people's categories. Even the lantern seems to straighten when their names pass. If you want a joke in buttons, you might visit John Rackham, Calico Jack, so called for the cloth he liked to wear. He's remembered for a flag with crossed cutlasses, a slash of design that shows up on mugs now. He's remembered too, here the lantern bends closer, for sailing with Anne Bonny and Mary Read. That detail gets told with either warmth or eyebrow, depending on the teller. Tonight we keep warmth. The ship was their workplace before it was anyone's headline, and work, as we've learned, prefers the regular miracle of competence to the irregular fireworks of gossip. If they laughed, it was because the sea does not mind laughter when it is earned. The Atlantic world in this age is tangled. Ropes upon ropes, some of them tied to terrible cargo. Ships cross carrying sugar, tobacco, coffee, cloth. Ships cross carrying human beings against their will. The sea doesn't disguise this, and neither will we, though we will speak gently. On some pirate decks, sources suggest, free black sailors worked their share, held their vote, navigated by stars that told the same truth to every skin. Some men once enslaved found leverage at sea they could not find ashore. Some joined crews after a captured ship gave them the smallest of choices. This is not a painted paradise. It is a workplace where certain hierarchies were looser, where skill with rope or compass could upstage the paper that named you, where your work might be weighed more fairly than your past. Not always, enough to matter. Our lantern shines equally on hands, and hands are what kept ships alive. Look toward the green border where the sea becomes shore. There are communities inland and along the coves where people who escaped bondage reshaped wild ground into home. Maroons, many called them. Settlements that grew precisely because the map wanted to ignore them. In some places, in some seasons, there were understandings with sea rovers who needed fresh water, fresh food, local news. In return came goods, tools, or a promise to be loud if a governor sniffed around. Think of it as neighbourly commerce with extra caution sewn into every seam. Not every maroon camp welcomed sails. Not every crew understood the obeyed of the forest. Where trust did arrive, it was carried in baskets woven of palm fronds and words that kept their shape. You could see the trade if you lifted a hut's curtain at dusk. A palm frond basket on a table, a heap of limes and cassava bound in fibre, a coil of twine that smells of new, and a horn lantern borrowed from the ship burning with the same agreeable light. Further along there's knowledge older than any mast that ever stood. Indigenous pilots, people whose grandparents and theirs learned the moods of the coast by listening, stepped aboard vessels more often than stories mention. They knew which reef sang sharp, which channel pretended to be deeper than it was, which river mouth would bite your ankles or roll you into safety. You might see a pilot kneel on a beach with a stick of driftwood and draw tomorrow's voyage on the sand, a line here, a notch there, a curl where the current curls, a careful cross where the wind acts peculiar after noon. The map lives in sand and then in feet, then in the way a hand moves a tiller. A squall later erases the drawing, but the ship keeps it, which is the only archive that matters. Our deck looks like a gathering of countries who forgot to bring flags. English hats beside French knives, Dutch pipes beside Spanish string, a shell necklace from a grandmother far up a river drifting against the wood bead someone bought from a man who insisted that bead knew luck personally. You can hear Portuguese singing to a sheet and Irish humming to a line. You can hear Congo words saying now and not yet and steady, which are the three phrases a deck understands best. The language of work is lighter than law and heavier than rumour. It passes from hand to hand like bone dice, clacking softly, keeping score only to make sure laughter happens in order. Here is a myth that likes to put on boots, that pirates were always fighting. The truth, repeated in yawns around any foremast, is that most days are housekeeping, and most raids are haggling in brisk weather. Gunners preferred their powder dry and their gossip drier. A negotiation completed in minutes is a piece of art. A battle is a piece of bad budgeting. Flags and reputations did the elegant labour, the way a host's good tablecloth convinces a guest not to spill. When music came aboard, it was more often because hands were free than because anyone had won anything. The fiddle cares about rhythm. It does not care about trophies. Another myth shakes its coins and asks you to please believe in buried treasure. The idea is romantic the way a locked door is romantic when you've lost the key. In this age, most wealth wants to move, not nap. Coin needs to pay the cooper today, not impress the archaeologist of tomorrow. Yes, there were moments. A storm insisted, a chase interrupted, a plan required hiding something for a week. But they were exceptions that taught storytellers to keep looking down at sand with a hopeful expression. If you find a chest beneath this palm, it was likely put there by a playwright. The only chests that matter aboard are the wooden ones full of spare sailcloth and dreams of dry socks. Walk the plank, that late flourish, belongs mostly to scenes written long after the lanterns we know have gone out. The sea has quieter ways of warning and kinder ways of being rid of trouble. Ports with patience, decks with votes, shorelines with opinions. Keel hauling, that cruel rumour, flickers in the record more as threat than practice, and often not aboard these chose-your-captain crews at all. A ship is a delicate instrument. You don't tune a violin with a hammer. You don't tune a crew with terror. Fear may sharpen a moment. Fairness sharpens a month. Hammocks reward the latter. Parrots? A few. They have more personality than manners, which is to say they fit in beautifully until the cook declares a policy. Monkeys? Occasionally and briefly. The cat, steadfast guardian of stored grain and sleeping feet, wins the election every time without needing to campaign. As for wardrobe, practical, generous with pockets, happy to be mended. Ornament appears now and then, a bright sash from a town where dies gossip, a ring that was once a spoon, a scrap of lace that pretends to keep the sun off a wrist. The earrings, if you see them, carry more superstition than vanity, little promises about eyesight and storms. The beard in certain men is more a record of time than a weapon. Names wear disguises harder than faces do. A man called John on Monday might be Jack by Thursday, a way of bending fate. A woman in shirt and breeches might answer to Tom for a month and remember to answer to herself only in the quiet after lights out. It isn't drama, it's self-defence and sometimes privacy. If you ask where someone is from, they might hand you 4 answers. Birthplace, ship of first pay, island of favourite breadfruit, the cove where they decided to begin again. None of them are lies. Each of them is a doorway to a version that makes sense tonight. You can see the edge of a maroon settlement at twilight if you know how to look. Nothing obvious, because obvious draws trouble. Smoke that knows how to hide, a garden that has decided to look accidental, a path that looks like deer made it until you notice no deer tie knots. At a meeting place agreed upon by rumour and palm, you might see a man from our deck waiting with a bundle that smells of tar and tea. He does not step beyond the agreed stone. He sets down a coil of rope, 2 knives that take pride in their edges, a small square of cloth that promises to last as long as a story, and a pouch of coin that jingles as little as possible. He picks up a basket of yams and limes and a jar of something that knows how to be sweet and safe. He says a name softly. The person who hears it nods. Neither of them speaks of governors. Neither of them speaks of loyalty in ways that make the future nervous. The lantern, the one borrowed from the ship, horn panels soft against its ribs, makes the transition from sea to shore and back without complaint. Light is the only border both sides agree does not have to be guarded. Some nights a pilot comes aboard from a canoe carved lean as a sentence, his paddle shining with the patience of oil. He's wearing a necklace of small shells that look like quiet moons, and feels the current with the flat of his hand as if greeting a sleeping dog. He shows the helmsman a shallow pass by placing a fingertip, and only a fingertip, on the tiller at exactly the right second, and the sloop slides over a secret as if it had always known. Payment is arranged with the particular courtesy reserved for those who do magic that leaves no smoke. A bolt of cloth that won't rot in the rain, a knife that will stay sharp long enough to raise a canoe into a boat, and a boat into a fleet. A promise that your lantern will be visible beyond the point on the night when it needs to be. This is the opposite of legend. It's the currency of trust. We practice small domestic rituals even as the names on shore grow loud. In a port where a governor is practicing sternness, The ship keeps its voice light. In a harbour where a merchant has developed religious feelings about escorts, the crew keeps the oars from clacking. In a cove where the wind decides to reverse itself, everyone agrees this is an excellent time to repair something that wasn't broken. The bone dice appear on a barrel, click patiently, and assure everyone that Chance enjoys being asked politely. Someone jokes that the dice only roll sixes when the cook is watching. The cook pretends not to hear and serves more stew. The stew proves the point. Not all of the famous belong to the sea forever. Some walk ashore into a pardon that promises forgiveness in exchange for certain new habits. Some try farming, which proves wind has more personality than soil. Some take rooms at inns with creaking signs and decide the lantern looks better on a table than on a hook. Others fail at becoming still and find themselves, one dawn, back at a rail with the same angle of arm and the same hunger for lines that tighten at the exact right moment. A few meet the law at gallows or bench. We step carefully there. We repeat the soft part, that a human life holds more than the last page of its book. If we must summarise, we will do it with kindness and a reminder that the sea keeps secrets not out of malice, but because memory is heavy and water prefers to travel light. What becomes of the small legends is almost funny if you whisper it. A man who once let his beard do the talking becomes a stage character whose beard enters the room before he does. A woman who could reef a sail in a tantrum wind becomes a print shop heroine who never eats or sleeps or mends, which proves the printmaker never sailed. The flags that varied like handwriting become a single skull that solves all design problems. The dice get bigger, the spoons get shinier, the cats get replaced by parrots who know too many jokes. You cannot blame a story for wanting to dress up for the theatre. You can only keep a spare chair at your own table for the version who ate stew, laughed once, and tied a line exactly so. A few evenings from now, on a beach a map forgot to draw until it was too late, you will sit with a small circle of people who do not belong to one country, or even one good theory. The sand is still warm from a sun that takes pride in hospitality. A driftwood stick has been used to sketch a coast with more accuracy than paint, and the sketch already glimmers under the first reach of tide. A horn lantern sits in the centre, its panels stained the colour of old honey. Around it, a mariner from a river whose name you've mispronounced kindly, a woman who kept her own name and added one on deck for convenience, a boy whose first voyage was shorter than a song, and whose second is going well, a pilot whose smile shows the same number of teeth whether he is pleased or sceptical, someone who has been free for 5 years longer than anyone expected, passes a palm frond basket filled with roasted plantain. It's sweet at the edge and salty in the middle, like stories. They trade news instead of swearing oaths. A governor's cousin is making trouble in a port 3 days north. A trader with a mole like a misplaced star pays on time if you compliment his hat. A patrol has begun to enjoy the sound of its own drums and can be avoided by leaving at dawn rather than at dusk. A sandbar moved a yard last moon and wants to move again. A rope maker has perfect hands and a bad temper. Bring patience and coin. There is a mango tree behind the third house from the wharf. Ask the woman in the second house for permission, and she will say yes if you admire her fern first. None of this is legend. All of it is the way people remain alive. You take up the driftwood stick when no one is looking and draw a circle where your lantern sits. The circle expands when the flame nods in the breeze. It tightens when the wind changes its mind. It isn't magic. It's gravity's little cousin, drawn in sand as a joke that understands itself. When the lantern is lifted, the circle erases itself quickly, embarrassed by attention. This is how reputation should behave, you think. Arrive when asked, do their work, slip away before they insist on staying past dinner. When the meeting ends, the canoe pushes off without a splash. The maroon path shuts itself like a book. The woman with 2 names stands, ties her hair in the ordinary knot she prefers, and returns to the ship by the long way so as not to forget the feel of dunes. The boy tucks a single bone die into his pocket because luck listens better when it is addressed privately. You pick up the lantern and feel its weight transfer to your wrist, and then to your shoulders, which is very nearly the definition of responsibility. It glows in the same grammar it used aboard, only now the air smells of hibiscus and smoke and cooling sand. It likes every country you carry it to. We have met the headline names and set them down again. We have walked through accents that deserve a conductor more than a judge. We have watched flags behave like sentences, women behave like weather, men behave like reasonable creatures on a day when the sea allows it. We have admired free black sailors who steered by stars and by stubbornness. We have nodded to maroon villages whose very quiet was a declaration. We have borrowed a pilot's fingertip to correct our course an inch and therefore our future a mile. We have unsewn myths one careful stitch at a time and sewn them back into the blanket as border rather than centre. If you ask what pirates looked like, you're asking the wrong question. If you ask how they sounded together, how the deck became a choir, you are closer. Tonight in your hammock you can hear all of them for a moment. Bellamy's reasonable tone measuring the wind, Teacher's slow match whisper smoked down to almost nothing, Bonnie and Reed laughing low at a joke a man didn't realise he'd made, Rackham fussing over a coat he pretends is an accident, a free black helmsman humming a tune from a place the ship will never arrive at and always carry, an indigenous pilot tapping a line on a chart and teaching the paper how to be patient, a maroon elder in a garden telling beans to climb and meaning it. The voices share the same roof of stars. The lantern, hanged on its hook, throws the same colour on every face. It doesn't care if you speak in vowels round as oranges or sharp as coral. It cares if you keep watch when it's your turn, if you pass the spoon with respect, if you remember that a living ship is a union of patience and speed. The flame quiets and steadies, which is its way of nodding. We're almost through with our long, warm work of reintroducing people to their sizes. Legends shrink down to human and fit at last in the galley bench. Humans sometimes swell into something kind enough to be legend for an evening, and then let the swell go when it is time to sleep. Outside, the beach sighs and erases the sand map because the sea cannot bear a plan that isn't also a secret. Inside, the bone dice tick once in a pocket and decide to be even. When you close your eyes, carry one picture. A necklace of small shells lying on a plank, a palm frond basket snug against a coil of rope, a horn lantern on a beach table with moths tapping its panels like polite critics, and around it the many faces of this age. They are not loud now, they are content. The myths have settled. The masks hang on a peg beside ordinary hats. The lived lives exhale and open their hands. Our same lantern, the one from the first harbour, the one we've borrowed in beach huts and cabins, keeps the promise it was invented for. It takes the sharpness out of edges. It makes the many look like a family long enough for sleep to do the rest. Tomorrow the tide will turn a little faster. Patrols will grow curious. Governors will discover new adjectives. Pardons will be offered with the smile of a cat. Our work will be to land this age with tenderness, to watch as the lantern dims from public ship to private story and then to ember. For now, let the chorus soften. Let the shells click once. Let the map erase itself with a contented shiver. Let the lantern swing once and then rest, remembering the first line we spoke tonight, that one accent cannot hold a sea and one legend cannot house a life. The lantern can, though, as long as the oil holds, and it has decided to keep watch until you've drifted back to your own very welcome shore. Your phone updates in the small hours, quietly fixing loopholes you never knew you had. Empires tried the same trick. One morning, a harbour wall that yesterday carried only chalked prices and a lost cat notice grows a new skin of parchment broadsides. Neat black letters promising mercy for a limited time, sternness for a longer one. A clerk with a quill and a pocketful of sand to blot ink paces the quay like a metronome, pinning up the King's Pardon where sailors fetch their bread and their rumours. The paper looks innocent, rag fibre plain, edges fluttering like the hems of sensible skirts. The words are not. They say, "Come in from the wind and be forgiven," or "Stay out and meet the weather we're ordering specially for you." By the lantern's gold the notice reads itself. The flame enjoys reading. Mercy first, it says. Return to the fold. Bring your ship with all deliberate speed, and we'll forget how your last year smelled of tar and ledger books that did not belong to you. After the date... Dates are always practical. Mercy curdles to prosecution under Admiralty law, which means a judge in a plain wig, a courtroom without a jury, and a sentence that prefers finality over conversation. A sailor runs a thumb along the paper's edge. It feels like money, with opinions. Dice pours in cups. The tavern's cat stops washing a paw and glances at the door, as if expecting someone to walk through wearing a new kind of certainty. The season had been turning anyway. War had ended. Those loud international years when letters of marque sent privateers out like tidy storms. Peace is lovely ashore. At sea it can feel like a rug pulled gently from beneath your feet. One signatory scribble in a European palace, and crews who once raided under neat permission find themselves unemployed by treaty. Some went hunting as before, and let the paperwork go dusty. Some turned their hands to legal trades and discovered that patience pays slowly but also keeps your neck comfortably undecorated. Others drifted to the edges: Nassau, Tortuga, small coves with friendly reefs and gulls with easygoing ethics, and invented ways to keep the wind busy. For a few shining years, speed and surprise made a living. But empires, when they switch from drums to accounts, are surprisingly spry. Convoys began to move like schools of thoughtful fish, frigates at their flanks like shepherd dogs who had read the right manuals. Governors who had winked last season developed new eyelids. Watchtowers sprouted on headlands where only goats had held office. Their bells, once the private pride of monasteries, learned to warn of sails that meant trouble. Insurance men, who had never been sea creatures, found clever ways to become weather anyway, charging more here, less there, whispering to merchants that a safer lane might taste dull but digest beautifully. News travelled faster too. Gazettes printed lists of names, not all of them accurate, with rewards beside them in figures that made a sailor think about new boots and then about a pardon, which is another kind of boot. Into Nassau, where hammocks had sometimes swung like flags and flags had sometimes behaved like suggestions, came a governor with a plan and a motto that really belonged on a coin. He brought warships and paperwork in equal measure, which is a terrifying combination, and a promise of trade restored, commerce sleeping in its own bed again, pirates out where rain could find them. He knew that the island was a cupboard. He turned the key. Crews who had treated the harbour as a friendly kitchen examined the new locks and discovered that the stove was still warm but the door stuck. Some walked in and accepted the king's pardon, signing with a steady or shaky hand according to temperament. Some turned quietly away, choosing the long way round the islands, where maps become rumours and a reef will keep your secrets if you feed it respect. Pardon have a sound. It's the clack of a dice cup set down for a while, the whisper of a quill confessing a name in an unfamiliar hand, the creak of a tavern sign that used to swing too merrily and has learned to settle. Benjamin Hornigold, knowledgeable, practical, took that road for a time, trading his wilder hours for the more upright posture of hunting other men who preferred to keep dancing. Others tried and failed to be calm. A few, brave, stubborn, or simply less interested in the word after, stayed dancing and met the kind of stories that leave taverns hushed. We step lightly there. The lantern lowers its voice for names you already know, nods at a sandbar off Carolina where a beard met its last tide, nods again at a river mouth where a gentleman of leisure discovered that courts admire leisure least when it has a ship attached. These are endings. We prefer the middles. Even so, it's useful to know which way the wind began to blow and why so many learned to stand differently when it did. Admiralty courts did their quiet work in rooms where daylight entered politely through small glass. No juries to sway, just law that preferred a straight line. Witnesses described flags without overmuch embroidery. Clerks wrote so carefully the paper almost smiled. Judges who had once lost a night's sleep to a stomachache blamed vaguely on stew, now stayed up for no one. When sentences came, they came with that old weight that wooden beams remember. The broadsides outside, the same neat pages that had promised mercy last month now announced with their unnerving cheerfulness the time and place of justice walking upright. Sailors with good hearts and bad luck looked at such notices and considered being shepherds. Some succeeded, and found that cows are less sarcastic than the sea. The practical reason the tide turned is that the sea changed shape, just enough to bother a small sloop. Trade grew fatter, cargoes moved in company. Little scatterings of boats became caravans with bells and drums. Escort ships learn to keep their temper and their powder dry in the exact ratio that persuades trouble to go check another lane. The governors, Jamaica, Virginia, the Carolinas, spoke to one another in an increasingly efficient key. Letters took a shorter, long time. Coordinated patrols arrived like a new fashion, long coats in the same shade walking arm in arm down the quay. It wasn't that courage vanished from small decks. It was that opportunity began to travel by coach. Charts improved too. This is a quieter villain. Soundings multiplied, coasts wore truthful contour lines, and the mysterious bits of blue that pirates once read with their bones became less mysterious, which helped escort fleets and made surprise more work. Even rumour grew a spine. Where once a fisherman's shrug could misdirect a governor's sloop for an afternoon, now the shrug was cross-checked with a church bell in the next village and a notary's raised eyebrow. The sea was becoming a ledger. If you had made a life in its margins, you felt the lines closing in. Not all who turned ashore did so with sulks. Some brought the habits of the deck to market with grace. A pilot with the wrists of a helmsman set up as a boatman and discovered that certain rich people will pay very well to be ferried through water that would rather not be ferried. A carpenter who had talked to masts for 15 years listened to house beams and found them almost as honest. A quartermaster became a shopkeeper and kept his chalkboard in the same position, just left of the till, and still frowned when numbers tried to wriggle. A musician left a fiddle on a mantel and married a woman with a laugh like rope paying out cleanly, then went back to the sea anyway because the fiddle and the rope were friends. There were wreckers too, Bahamas folk who greeted storms the way a miller greets wheat. When a ship kissed a reef too hard and needed to unburden itself in order to live, boats would row out like practical saints. Salvage is an old conversation, and not always a polite one, but in a world where charts argued, it was an industry as steady as laundry. Wrecking drew in ex-sailors who kept their ethics in good order, and found that a lantern on a clean night and a coil of line well coiled were still the difference between problem and solution. They learned the exact weight of a wet barrel, and how to accept gratitude without blushing, or, when necessary, how to accept a court's thank you with a nod and a hat that behaved. If you stood in a harbour in those years and listened differently, you could hear careers turning like tides. A man whose laugh you recognised from a boarding party now timed convoys with a bell on a warehouse wall. A woman who had once tied her hair like a plan, now tied it like a policy, and kept books for a chandlery whose owner had learned to put the good rope in the front and the merely decent rope behind it. Free black sailors, who had earned respect where the sea evaluated by skill, sometimes found ashore the same limits they had first gone to water to outrun. Others worked pilotage and wharves and built the kind of knowledge that humbles a governor in a small, satisfying way. Not every story resolved. This is not a chapel with a neat sermon. But for many, the wind that had once danced behind the ears now moved to in front of the face and became breath. There is a pewter mug on the table of a quiet inn that smells of citrus peel and damp wool. 2 hands cradle the mug as if it must be kept warm for a friend. Those hands belong to an old sailor whose eyes have decided to go kind rather than sharp. He tells the young that raids were mostly logistics with a sense of humour, that flags were letters of introduction rather than declarations of war, that weapons were the last resort of planners who planned with their feet. He says the crackdown came like rain after heat. You could smell it before it fell, and that the pardons, paper birds pinned to posts, tempted and frightened in equal measure. He does not boast. He is proud of knots, of a certain day when a hook bit a rail so softly the rail admired the hook, of a particular stew on a Wednesday that proved the cook could forgive. He laughs once, about a spoon he returned late, and the scolding it earned him. The spoon is a safer story than the names that end on benches and beams. The lantern on the shelf smiles at the spoon and nods at the names anyway. Tonight, perhaps, he reads aloud a broadside that he took down instead of signing. He was stubborn that morning, and kept in his sea chest until the sea chest became a dresser. The paper is foxed now, browned at the edges like toast too intent on becoming itself. The letters are still crisp, Mercy in large type, method in larger. He folds it back along the old crease and tucks it next to a tiny bag of bone dice that have decided to roll only high numbers on feast days. He speaks of men who used their pardon to become pilots with enviable hats. He speaks of others whose reputations grew larger in the telling as their lives ended. He asks that we shrink the legend to a size fit for a coat hook. He gestures at the lantern on the shelf and says it always looked better on a moving ship. Everyone glances at it the way people glance at a former lover and pretend they're checking the time. Memory has its own currents, but print lays down its own channels. A book appeared not long after the pardons had done most of their persuading. It gathered names and stories and stitched them into a coat more colourful than any the quartermaster would have allowed. The author's identity remains a sailor's rumour. Some say one man, others suspect another. The lantern shrugs, but the sentences swarmed taverns and parlours like moths to every flame. A general history, the title promised, and who can resist a general? It added skulls where there had been eyebrows, added buried chests where there had been fast pockets and faster markets, added speeches where there had been chalk. It made theatre out of housekeeping. We forgive it. Bedtime likes costumes. Later centuries would come back with novels and stages and screens and build on that coat until it walked around without its owner. The "ah" most people hear in their heads at the word pirate arrived very late to rehearsal and then insisted on opening the show. The Afterlives are lively. Ballads stomped their boots on tavern floors and sang of omens and oaths. Broadsides promised thrilling executions and were disappointingly punctual about dates. Stage plays put a swaggering hat on the head of a character who had never owned a hat that did not fray. Children many years later learned to swing wooden cutlasses in back gardens and declared the rosebush to be a galleon, a fate no rosebush deserves and all bear with grace. A ride in an amusement park learned how to make darkness purr in a way that reminded no one of tar but made everyone grin. The history, meanwhile, stayed quietly in books and charts, in court records, and in the handwriting of captains who retired into shopkeepers and kept their ledgers cleaner than legend would prefer. The end of a golden age rarely announces itself with a bell. It is more often a slow dimming, a sense that the shortcuts have been paved, that the back doors now have respectable addresses. Ships grew bigger bellies and better escorts. Governors practiced coordination like a new instrument and discovered they were almost musical. Ports paved their thoughts, insurance curdled into policy. The ordinary miracle of a small sloop outpacing law, by knowing a reef better than rumour, became less likely, then rare, then something you had to stay up very late to hear about from someone who had a reason to embroider. The lamp that had once guided bold men to safe water now guided shop boys to closing time. If you walked Nassau streets a few years after the pardons, you might have noticed the way the wind learned to behave. The fort's flag snapped in a way that said timetable. The harbour, while never dull, harbours dislike dullness on principle, seemed to prefer coin that made receipts. The motto stamped on a certain seal, commerce restored, pirates removed, would have looked at home carved into the beam of an office where a tall clock minded the afternoon. The tavern still laughed, but the laughter carried a little less gunpowder, a little more shopkeeper's contentment. The lanterns were still bright. They were simply more likely to go to bed at a respectable hour. The last echoing names belong here gently. One beard extinguished at Ocracoke, after a morning that did not care if stories later preferred fog. A gentleman in fine linen who had been very bad at decisions met a bench that was good at them. A captain fond of calico discovered that flags are not proof against courts. A boy who had mistaken boldness for weather learned that weather changes. In each case there were papers and boots, and a crowd who came to see the end of something because the beginning had been whispered into their cups for years. We will not paint it. The lantern will not stare. If you must stand there with the crowd, stand at the back and hold a hat against your chest, and think about rope in its happier moods. What we keep is smaller and kinder. The smell of a chart that just received its daily thumbprint. The coin slap of a dice cup that means a minute's leisure at last. The hot breath of a galley that knows how to turn onion and luck into memory. The tidy scratch of chalk that pretends money is easy. The way a flag lifts even when it means only good morning. The sound of a convoy bell in mist, telling you that the world still believes in schedules. The creak of an inn sign that has survived 3 paint jobs and 2 storms and 1 love affair with the weather. The glow of a lantern over a pewter mug at last light, catching the curve of the rim as if it were a horizon, and anyone could sail there for the cost of a sip. What becomes of the lantern when the decks grow tidier, and the pardons are filed and the broadsides yellow at the edges? It keeps working. It becomes the gaze under which oceans turn into stories, the house light for people who climbed down from rigging and discovered they were very good at shelves. It sits in beach huts and pilot boats, and the parlours of retired quartermasters whose chalkboards now show the price of onions. It becomes the halo around a face telling a child that most pirates preferred negotiation to noise, that their democracy floated because it needed to, that people who work together in the wind become careful with one another without noticing. It becomes the small dawn you carry on a night walk when you can't sleep because the sea is still rocking somewhere in your bones. By now you can hear the creak of that first harbour again. The bell taps once, softly mischievous. The ledger's weight is familiar on the clerk's arm. Rope knocks against a mast like a neighbour reminding you to water the plants. The same gull yawns the same ridiculous yawn. In a cabin, a lantern holds a small, steady, responsible sun. The age we've sailed through, tar and tuned flags, fast hulls and faster arithmetic, laughter and onions and a decent amount of chalk, has found its shore. The tide did turn. It had to. Tides do. But the things worth keeping, the careful hands, the fair division, the habit of making rules together in the dark and keeping them in the light, walked ashore and refused to drown. We will leave the last scene somewhere ordinary. A narrow street in a port town, shutters grey with salt, an inn signboard that has learned to sing in high wind. Inside, a table rubbed smooth by elbows more real than any ballad. 2 old shipmates sit within reach of a lantern that knows their names. One speaks of a pardon, and the other of a chase. They both speak of stew and the price of onions, which continues to require commentary. They laugh softly at how memory folds weather into fabric. They raise their pewter mugs to those who took the king's paper, and to those who didn't, and to those who did not get to choose. They do not toast flags. They toast the quartermaster's slate, the captain's better judgment, the carpenter's ear for wood, the boy who learned to lean diagonally in a hammock and thereby saved his back for a lifetime of mornings. When they part, the lantern is pinched to a glow, then to a pearl, then to the friendliness that lives on glass for a minute after flame. You can almost hear it saying what it has said since the first night we watched the harbour yawn open. That light is a promise, not a boast. That speed is kinder when tidy. That courage is quieter than drums and likes work lists. That the sea, if you treat it with a steady hand and a decent joke now and then, will allow you to cross it without insisting you become a legend. The door shuts, the signboard creaks, the tide climbs the steps like a familiar cat, and then decides not to come in after all. A bell, somewhere, announces that it is time to sleep, and so the lantern, ours, yours, theirs, becomes a memory that travels with you the way salt lives in your cuffs long after you've walked inland. There will be other ages, other seas, other brochures promising mercy in 12-point type. But tonight you have this: 6 keepings of a light on moving wood, 6 evenings of tin cups and tar, 6 nights of thread-count democracy and practical grace. The flame is out, the warmth lingers, the ship is now a story. It will float as long as you tell it gently. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time,